Jim, where are you going to look in this whole galaxy? Where are you going to look for Spock's brain?
Bridge to all decks. Red alert. Red alert. Battle stations. It's time for an unforgettable episode of Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve. I'm Scott Mantz.
And I'm Steve Morris, and I believe that we should retitle this episode Scott's Brain.
Scott's Brain might have been a better title. In fact, it might have been a better episode because, look at the results. Spock's Brain. We are here. Steve Morris, we have arrived. We have arrived at one of the most memorable episodes of Star Trek, not for the right reasons. And I don't know. I guess the first question for you is what have been your feelings about Spock's Brain over the years?
You know what I was thinking about? Because I was thinking about, well, what is Spock's Brain? Because Spock's Brain is actually more than an episode, I think. I think Spock's Brain, it is a symbol of something. And you know what I suddenly went is what Spock's Brain is like? Spock's Brain is like jumping the shark. Spock's Brain is like the episode of Happy Days where Arthur Fonzarelli water skis over a great white shark. Now, Happy Days was like my favorite show. And so my guess is when that episode came out, I thought it was great.
Yeah.
I'm sure I loved it. And I'm sure if I went back to rewatch it, I would see just how stupid that episode is. And like all of episodes of Star Trek, I didn't think as a kid that Spock's Brain was particularly bad. And now it's so funny because we just did my least favorite episode of Star Trek, hands down.
Yep.
And now we are going to do the symbol of Star Trek essentially jumping the shark, which is Spock's Brain.
That is a great way to put it. It is the episode in which Star Trek jumped the shark. And look at the episode they chose for the beginning of season 2.
Yep.
After a great buildup in season 1, they come back in season 2 with an episode for the fans. The first trip to Vulcan. We see other Vulcans. We see the live long and prosper, and we see the symbol for the very first time. Kirk has to fight Spock. It was like a Star Trek fan's dream come true episode. So they come back for season 3 after the fans saved the day so that a season 3 could even happen. And what do they put on first? Spock's Brain. So you go from a mock time, representing the very best of Star Trek, to Spock's Brain representing not the worst, but it's close. It's close. And, my feelings about Spock's Brain have definitely evolved over the years. And I didn't need the teacher to have this epiphany. But like the episode we just did, And the Children Shall Leave, which was the episode they filmed just prior to Spock's Brain, that's just a bad episode. That's an episode that offers no enjoyment at all watching it. Spock's Brain does offer enjoyment, though maybe for unintentionally amusing reasons. But also, the specter of Spock's Brain is this, Steve. Over the years, over the decades, Spock's Brain has been a punching bag for Star Trek. Even people who don't like Star Trek, and maybe even some people who've never heard of Star Trek, know what Spock's Brain is because of all the pop cultural references to Spock's Brain over these decades. Like in The Simpsons, they make fun of Spock's brains. I think in Futurama, they make fun of Spock's brain. So it's like Trouble with Tribbles, even non-fans know about it, but Spock's Brain is a completely different episode than the Trouble with Tribbles. Maybe it should have been intentionally funny, and then it might have been a better episode. But it really is, if I dare use the word, fascinating to see what Spock's Brain represents. And I mean, there are Star Trek conventions where they will show Spock's Brain so the fans can laugh at it and make fun of it. And they'll have like sort of Mystery Science Theater 3000 presentations where they'll make fun of the episode. And that actually hurts me to see that because I love the characters so much, and I don't want I don't want to see them made fun of in that way. But I get the appeal of using Spock's brain to do that. Now, my question is, do you think that because season 3 was renewed and they moved the time slot to 10 p.m. on Friday nights, which was not the right time slot for Star Trek? So my question, Steve Morris, is this: do you think Spock's brain was literally a you to NBC?
Let me go back and see if I understand your question correctly. Who made the decision to put Spock's brain first?
That's the question. I don't know if it was something that NBC chose or if it was something that Paramount chose, that the producers chose. That I don't know.
So if your question is, did the producers put Spock's brain first as part of revenge for the bad time slot? No, I don't think so. Because the biggest reason is, why would you shoot yourself in the foot? Like, that's not, it's just not a motivation. Hey, we've made this terrible episode, let's put it first. Nobody thinks that way. No, I don't think that. What I wonder is if it's the opposite, which is that that actually was done out of the way that executives tend to make poor decisions, which is looking at something from the outside and not understanding it so much from the inside. And let me preface this by saying there are fantastic executives out there. And we've even heard, of executives working with Star Trek that made some great suggestions. But frequently what happens is they'll go, oh, Spock is our biggest character. Amok Time, that was very successful. It was a Spock-oriented show. Let's put a Spock-oriented show first. This is Spock's brain. Done. That's going to work great, without looking at what the actual episode is. And this is the thing to me is, I came up with sort of my prescription for a good Star Trek episode. And for me, that is an interesting science fiction idea, some good adventure, story points, and making it personal. And obviously, Amok Time has all those things. Spock's brain, maybe it has a good science fiction idea in there somewhere. Maybe there's some okay things, and it's not personal at all. There's nothing personal in this episode. If we look at the first bunch of episodes that we've gone through, does Paradise Syndrome have personal things with science fiction ideas and good adventure elements? Absolutely. Does the Enterprise incident? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Does And the Children Shall Lead in Spock's brain? No. They really, really don't. And here's the other thing too, that normally I try not to give too many of my thoughts before we start the show, but I do want to give one more, which is that so much of the problem with this episode is the phrase Spock's brain.
Yeah.
There are elements of this episode that are just so stupid and sound so stupid that it lowers what actually isn't as bad an episode as some of the other ones we've done. But it's like, it's actually okay for a lot of it.
Yeah.
And then you hear something that is just ridiculous.
Yep.
And it drops it down into the toilet. That's what we're, as opposed to And the Children Shall Lead, which I find unwatchable pretty much beginning to end. That is a different diagnosis than I will give to Spock's brain.
Well, I first of all, I agree with your points completely. And when we were closing out And the Children Shall Lead, and I promoted the next episode as being Spock's brain, I also said that I like Spock's brain, and I do like Spock's brain. I like it because it's not a boring episode to watch. It's a fascinating episode to experience, to the extent that the teaser and the first act are great. And then it goes from being great to good in the second act, and then it goes off the rails in the third and the fourth acts. It's just such a fascinating trajectory for an episode to watch it, go from starting off great and having great intentions, like the intentions you said that you clearly pointed out, like with comparing Amok Time, the success of Amok Time with the failures of Spock's brain, but the intent was there. And the irony with NBC, if it was NBC that actually chose Spock's brain because it was a Spock episode, the irony is that it's not a Spock episode.
No,
it's a Kirk episode, because Kirk is lost without his friend and his first officer, and he, just like with Amok Time, he pulls out all the stops to save him. But it was actually, when it came to the concept of maybe there was some intent there to kind of stick it to the NBC executives, it was actually William Shatner who said in his 2008 book, Up Till Now, he said, our first show that third season might have been a tribute to the NBC executives who so mishandled this show. It was a show, it was a society in desperate need of a brain. That's from William Shatner himself. And, we're going to see a lot from this point forward in the third season, because even though Spock's Brain was the first episode of the third season to air, it was like the sixth episode of the third season to film. And it was filmed on 6 days between July 8th and July 15th, 1968. It was the 62nd episode to film overall. The season 3 premiere, 56 to air, when it aired on September 20th, 1968. But from this point forward, you're going to start to see so many key creative geniuses involved with Star Trek start to leave the show, starting with director Mark Daniels. Mark Daniels, who gave us the Doomsday Machine and, the Naked Time. This was his 14th episode and his last episode, because he did not appreciate the restrictions that were now being placed on the directors of Star Trek in its third season by its new producer, Fred Freiberger. And I've got a very interesting quote to read from him, when we wrap all this up. But Spock's Brain was directed by Mark Daniels. It was written by another Star Trek genius, Gene Kuhn, under his pseudonym Lee Cronin. As we stated during Spectre the Gun, which was the first episode to film for season 3, he was using the name Lee Cronin because he'd already started working as a writer-producer for It Takes a Thief at Universal. And the only way he could keep writing for Star Trek is if he sort of, did it under the radar. So that's why the pseudonym came up. But Kuhn wrote his story outline on March 11th, 1968. He proceeded to a first draft teleplay by April 15th. Fred Freiberger, the season 3 producer, revised the story outline on April 22nd, and then Kuhn took a second stab at a draft teleplay on May 8th. Story editor Arthur Singer did a script polish, a final draft, on June 26th, and Fred Freiberger did a script polish, a revised final draft, on July 1st. Now, there are so many things about Spock's Brain, Steve, that I actually really like, starting with the score. The music is so very good. It was recorded specifically for this episode by Fred Steiner. Fred Steiner, also a legendary composer for Star Trek. This is also his last episode, his last score. The score is composed on August 26, 1968. The visual effects for the Enterprise, of course, were done by the Howard Anderson Company. The non-Enterprise visual effects were done by the Westheimer Company. And, so much of Fred Steiner's score was used throughout the rest of season 3 that you really see how much of a dominant score that it was. And for an episode that has its faults, the score was not one of them.
So some of the things going on in the world at the time, from July 8th to the 15th of 1968, there is once again shelling across the Israeli-Egypt border near Suez. North Vietnam is getting more and more aid from the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China. Georges Pompidou, who was the prime minister of France, resigns after a large conflict with Charles de Gaulle, who was the president. Vassar University on July 11th made the decision to become fully co-ed after 107 years as an all-women's school. And then, we've been talking about the upcoming presidential election. We talked about the assassinations, about Johnson's choosing not to run. Well, at this moment, the latest Gallup poll shows Hubert Humphrey is ahead of Nixon. Again, these are things where the world would have been completely different.
Oh, no question about it.
I've been talking about last week we had 2 hijackings going to Cuba. This week, a hijacking on the way to Cuba was foiled by the flight engineer who disarmed the hijacker.
Wow, cool.
Yeah. And this I knew nothing about, which is kind of shocking. On July 13th, a influenza A strain in Hong Kong was officially declared a worldwide pandemic. I didn't know about a pandemic in 1968. It killed somewhere between 1 and 4 million people.
In Hong Kong?
Well, it's known as the Hong Kong flu. That's where it started.
Oh,
But
wow.
no, it was a worldwide pandemic. I don't know how much it made it to the United States, but you know, 'cause we certainly know a lot about pandemics now. And I know
Yeah,
anything
we
about
sure
this.
do.
On July 15th, the very first commercial airline service from the United States to the Soviet Union began. And on the same day, on ABC TV, One Life to Live premiered, which went on for 43 more years until finally being canceled in 2012.
No way. Wow. That's a long life.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as long. I forget which one's the longest. It might be
Guiding Light.
Guiding Light, yeah, which is like, you know, starts on radio and goes
Yep.
for 70 years or something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, those things are. And by the way, it's funny talking about soap operas. At this very moment, I am preparing a movie that deals with soap operas for the cinephiles. Will be coming out in a couple weeks, and that is Tootsie.
Oh God, what a great episode. What a great episode of the Cinephiles that's going to be. I love that movie.
It's such a good movie. But we are not discussing Tootsie. We are discussing Spock's Brain.
Brain. Ah!
And I will say one more thing.
Yeah.
One of the other big problems with Spock's Brain is they shouldn't have titled it Spock's Brain.
Awful title.
Because
Awful
it's the
title.
repetition. I mean, I already don't like when you say the name of a title, except under very specific circumstances in a movie or TV show. The fact that they name this thing Spock's Brain, and we say Spock's Brain over and over, and it is a terrible, terrible choice.
I don't know how many times it was, but I'm sure one of our loyal listeners, one of our enterprisers, will hit us up on our Facebook page and let us know exactly how many times the words Spock's Brain is actually used in Spock's Brain. But I am with you. I think one of the starting points to dive in to make fun of Spock's Brain is because of the title of the episode. It's just an awful, awful title. And, you know, they like Gene Coon, I mean, you know, with the Devil in the Dark and Errand of Mercy and all these other great titles that he's come up with. I mean, like they couldn't have changed the name of the name of this episode. It's you're right. It's an awful title. I hate the title.
Yeah, I mean, there must have been some Shakespeare quote or some philosophical,
totally
something about, you know, a mind apart, you know, like separate the soul or some like, well, and this is the thing too, and we'll get into it, is there are ideas here that could have been interesting.
Yep.
We just didn't explore them. But we begin, and by the way, Scott, I actually don't agree. I don't love this teaser. We start right in the middle of a red alert. I find it all very slow in terms of its pacing. But we're watching, something's going on, lots of looking. We've armed our phaser banks.
Configuration unidentified, ion propulsion, high velocity, though of a unique technology.
Any contact, Lieutenant?
Scotty is very impressed with the spaceship. And, you know, it takes a lot to impress Scotty.
Interesting design.
I've never seen anything like it. And ion propulsion at that. They could teach us a thing or two.
So you don't like this teaser. I like this teaser.
I think it's slow.
Okay.
That's my big thing.
Because I know we've talked before about starting a scene or getting into a scene while it's already underway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's what's happening here. You're the red alert, the klaxon is going off. Everyone is at their stations. It's actually busy on the bridge. Like everyone is doing their job. And you have, you know, new ship that was created for the beginning of season 3 for this episode. You have a great score. I think Fred Steiner's score for this episode, at least the first part of it, is actually cinematic. And I just love that everyone is playing to their strength on the bridge.
Life forms, Mr. Spock?
1. Humanoid or similar, low level of activity, life support systems functioning.
And then that one passenger beams aboard the Enterprise, and there this woman appears with this strange sort of innocent smile on her face.
This woman in a miniskirt and go-go boots beams aboard the Enterprise. We'll learn later on in the episode her name is Kara, and she's played by Marge Doucet. She is a 2-time Emmy nominee. Talk about soap operas. She was nominated for All My Children and for Guiding Light. She was also on the soap opera Santa Barbara. She was also on TV's The Wild Wild West, Bonanza, Hawaii Five-0, Hogan's Heroes, Mannix, Barnaby Jones, The Facts of Life, But here she is on the bridge, on the Enterprise. Everyone stops what they are doing and stare at her. Spock and Kirk stand up, and Kirk does his greeting. I'm Captain James T. Kirk of this is the Starship Enterprise. And she looks at Spock and then looks down at her wrist and pushes these buttons on this device on her wrist. Everybody passes out.
And what I should say is it's not just on the bridge. Everyone on the Enterprise goes out, including Chapel and McCoy. And she walks through the bridge, walks up to Spock, touches his head, smiles. The camera pushes in, and we fade out.
I think this is a great teaser. And if I was watching this first as the season premiere of season 3, I would be like, wow, we're back. Like,
sure,
Star Trek is back. And not only are we back, but we are red alert. And there is a strange alien ship approaching the Enterprise. Like, this is great. Oh my God, this is exactly what I was hoping for. But yeah, that's going to be short-lived.
We come back in Act 1 and everyone's sort of lights come back on and everyone's sort of waking up. And then as we're trying to get reports, we hear from McCoy,
"You better come down to sickbay right now."
We cut there, and there is Spock lying on a bed with a fabric over his head, and he's in some huge device. And we see the stats on the medical monitor just at the very bottom.
And that his Vulcan physique actually got him to the point where McCoy was able to step in and attach him to the life support and keep his body going. But they have no idea what happened.
You've got him on complete life support. Was he dead? He was worse than dead. Jim, come on, Bones, what's the mystery?
And this is the first of many moments where the execution of a line, instead of inciting mystery and suspense, incites some unintentional chuckles and laughter.
His brain is gone.
And there's this music sting to really overstate the obvious. And Kirk mouths his brain. And this is a hint of the unintentional sort of chuckles that are to come.
Yeah, it's gonna be the repetition of that word brain, man.
Yeah.
It's just gonna get really rough. Here's a question for you.
Yep.
Why is Spock in sickbay?
I always thought, and that's a great question, like, how did he get from the bridge to sickbay? I think this alien woman who beamed aboard, obviously she is already under the influence of the teacher. I think she knew exactly where to go, and she brought him to sickbay to take out his brain and left him there. I mean, but she did not leave him attached to life support. Like, she just left him there.
But so did she use sickbay equipment?
See, that's a question. I don't think that she did, because McCoy would have noticed that she actually used equipment.
I think this is just one. It's minor, but it makes no sense.
Yeah.
Like, because the thing is that one would assume that if you had the super technology to remove somebody's brain, it's on her ship. You know what I mean? It's not in sickbay.
Why did she take Spock to her ship?
Yeah.
And just take his brain there, and who cares about his body?
And if they didn't need the technology, maybe she needed to lie him on a bed. Well, it didn't have to be in sickbay. Like, the reason he's in sickbay was because that's where he needed to be for McCoy to save his life. You know, like, it's not a big deal, but it's one
Definitely
of many
questionable.
things.
It's a questionable plot point that bears scrutiny, for sure.
And what we hear is that this is way beyond our technology, because they managed to remove every single thing and seal every nerve absolutely perfectly. And then we get a bunch of things that end up, I think, being somewhat contradictory.
An incredible Vulcan physique hung on to the life support cycle took over. But there is no mind.
And then we have another music sting. The overused music stings is also part of what makes this turn to comic.
There is a music sting coming up later in this episode that I absolutely hate, because it just beats you over the head in the worst possible way. But, I think you know what I'm talking about, but we'll get to it.
Bones, how long can you keep him functioning? If it happened to any of us, I would say indefinitely. But Vulcan physiology limits what I can do. Spock's body is much more dependent upon that tremendous brain for life support.
it's all these weird contradictions, because he just said his body managed to survive without his brain, which our bodies couldn't. But now he's saying his body is too dependent upon his brain, whereas ours could survive without his brain, without our brains.
Right.
It's just weird.
There's a lot of inconsistencies in this episode.
And then Kirk says,
"We'll have to take him with us." Take him where? In search of his brain, Doctor.
Oh.
My note here is, these are all dumb lines.
Yeah, I agree.
And I go like, okay, the idea of what happens to someone if you remove their brain, and what is the brain without the human body, and can the brain be used to do another thing? I actually think those are interesting science fiction ideas, but the hunt for Spock's brain is not.
Well, you yourself, in your segment where you go over world events, on December 3rd, 1967, the very first heart transplant was conducted.
Oh, right.
And when we were talking about that,
right,
and I said that was an inspiration, that was the inspiration for this episode, because they wanted, the writers and producers of Star Trek loved being able to link an episode like this to what was such a hot topic, organ transplants. And here you have an episode called Spock's Brain, and it just like announces, oh, something's up, and not that it really drove up the ratings very much, but they love the idea of it, just like with the Enterprise incident, and the Pueblo incident being something that was tied to a very, very well-known current event.
Except, well, this is the thing. It's not engaging in the actual science fiction idea. What would happen, Scott, if I took your brain and could put it somewhere else? Would you still be you? That's the scientific idea.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, we're not really dealing with that at all. And I also have a question, too. When Kirk says, then we'll have to take him with us, what does he mean?
Take him with us in search of his brain.
So in what way? How are they taking him with us? What's he referring to?
His body.
Right. Is he saying, because this is what I think he's saying, is he saying, well, you're going to have to rig something where Spock can walk around even if he doesn't have his brain, and control him with a remote control, which is what happens later in the episode? Is that what he's saying?
I think he's just saying,
because they're going to take him. He's on the ship.
Yeah, he's on the ship. So of course they're going to take him.
But they're not going to leave him behind.
Right. Kirk is going to take him with him. Well, maybe, they could have gone to like a starbase or something like that
but they're going to take his body. That's why I go like, the only possible meaning I can come up with for this line is anticipating what McCoy is going to do with Spock's body later in the episode. But the fact that Kirk can say that when no brain has ever successfully been removed from a living body,
right.
Kirk can't know that we would be capable of, you know what I mean? It's like, it's a useless line that also doesn't make sense.
Well, it also, one way in which the line is useful is like, this is okay. This is the moment when we announce the intentions of this episode, that we are going to take Spock with us while we search the galaxy for his brain. Kirk is saying, well, we'll find it. And, McCoy is saying,
where are you going to look in this whole galaxy? Where are you going to look for Spock's brain?
Again, that line is used so many times.
And this is one of the key things, is that McCoy is not capable of restoring the brain. So even if they find it, we're not going to be able to restore it, which is a key plot point.
The thief that took it has the knowledge. I'll force it out of her. If you don't find it in 24 hours, you'd better forget the whole thing, Jim.
So we have a thing that has never, ever happened before, where Spock's body manages to survive without the brains, where McCoy says, I could predict how this would go better if we had humans. I can't predict how long I can keep this body alive with its Spock. Oh, except there's a hard 24-hour limit for this thing that's never happened before.
And as you know, in previous Star Trek episodes where there was a race against time.
Absolutely.
That execution of the race against time created so much drama and suspense. And here, like, for some reason, that race against time, because we are counting down the hours and the minutes that we have left until it's too late to replace Spock with his brain. And for some reason in this episode, I'm not filled with suspense and intensity. like with the Doomsday Machine or something like that, or the Naked Time, where we got to we're 12 minutes until we enter the atmosphere of Psi 2000. There's a race against time that is lacking in dramatic suspense.
Well, and part of it's this is why I point this out, is that it's because of how it's set up. If Jim said, how long can you keep it alive? He's like, I'm barely keeping him alive now.
Mhm.
We're lucky that his Vulcan physique was so strong. Otherwise, he'd be dead. Like, cut out the thing that I could keep humans alive longer, because that confuses this issue. Say, no, he's barely alive now, and he's already weakening. Heart rate's down. My guess is maybe he can make it 24 hours, but even I don't know.
Yeah.
But there's no way. But this has never happened before. There's no way for me to know. Now we have a ticking clock, but the setup makes more sense,
Sure.
rather than a hard 24 hours, which doesn't make any sense.
Well, Mark Daniels, one thing that he really wanted to do during the directing of this episode, he wanted to pull off an ambitious shot on the bridge where Kirk walks back and forth in front of the starfield, the view screen, and you see that the Enterprise is in motion. Now, on every episode prior to this, they would use a stock shot of Sulu looking at the view screen, or Chekhov looking at the view screen, or just the view screen itself, and there would be a visual effects shot of the starfield or the planet or whatever it was, the Doomsday Machine, but in this episode, Mark Daniels wanted to shoot from an angle on the bridge that was never done before, and that you would see that that view screen actually does work because there's a star field and the stars are moving. So the only way that he would have gotten his chance is if the episode was brought in on schedule. If it looked like Daniels was going on schedule, then Freiberger would have said, "Okay, take your dream shot." But so now when we're on the bridge, the first thing we see is Kirk in front of the view screen, and the star field is moving, and that was achieved by rear projection, so that it looks like, oh wow, this is a real functioning bridge. Again, it's an angle that was never used before, and it was never used again in the original series. But to sort of get the safety earlier in the production, Mark Daniels had the scene play out where Kirk and Chekhov and Uhura and Sulu are looking, you see them looking at the screen and you see them say their lines. And then, later the visual effects shot would be implanted over the view screen. So he filmed that earlier in the schedule. But when it looked like they were on schedule, Freiberger said, "Okay, you got your wish, take your shot." So on day 6, Mark Daniels got his wish, and he filmed the scene on the bridge with Kirk walking back and forth in front of the view screen with that rear projection. And a Star Trek fan is a Star Trek fan when they cut Spock's brain some slack because of this ambitious shot for the original series. Like, only a Star Trek fan would say, yeah, but Spock's brain, yeah, it's not a great episode, but it's got that great shot of the rear projection that Mark Daniels did. That's when a Trekkie is a true Trekker.
Well, I think we've proven definitively that I am not a true Trekker.
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not, based on your definition, because I looked at that. It's funny because I have in my notes, I was like, oh, that's interesting. He's walking in front of those stars what an interesting shot. Here's why I don't think it's a good thing. Why is that shot important in this particular episode? This isn't a particular space episode. There's nothing particularly interesting on screen. And so my guess is Mark Daniels is on his way out. He doesn't want to be here anymore. He's probably wanted to do a shot like this and been turned down over and over again for the past 13 episodes. And he went, man, I'm going to get that damn shot.
I agree.
No matter what. But the thing is, it's not necessary. And so what he did was he rushed what was already a crappy episode in order to add a useless shot. It doesn't add anything to the story at all.
I agree with you in terms of
that. You are also not a true Trekker based on your definition.
Well, but what I agree with you that the shot itself doesn't, the shooting of the scene in this particular way does not add anything to the story. It doesn't advance the plot in any way that makes a significant difference. But I think it is so cool looking.
It's a cool shot.
And I agree with you. I think Mark Daniels is probably like, you know what? I already said I would do this episode. I'm not crazy about the third season. I'm not crazy about the politics going on, on the lot. And I'm not crazy about Fred Freiberger. And he was not, as you'll find out later when we talk about, what people said about the episode. So I think you're right. I think Mark Daniels said, you know what? I've always wanted to do this shot. This is my last episode. By hook or by crook, I'm going to do it. And I don't care about what else is filmed, how fast we film it in order to make the time to get that shot. I agree with all of that. But I think that like among the many merits of Spock's brain, including the music and including the teaser in the first act, this particular rear projection shot, I think is awesome. And when I was watching Spock's brain again for the first time in a long time, because like And the Children Shall Lead, this is not one that I've seen in a really long time. I was watching it, and in HD, I was like, wow, that rear projection shot is so cool. And it's the only time in the original series that they did this. So for that reason alone, Spock's brain deserves some props.
I have one more totally minor nitpick, but you know how at the beginning and the first season, the early episodes, they'd say, okay, maximum warp, and it's warp 4. And then, we just really hadn't figured out what this was. In this episode, they say maximum warp, and they say, okay, warp 6. And it's like, look, we're in the third season.
Yeah.
We just had a warp 9 just a couple episodes ago.
Yep.
Like, you should have figured this out by now.
Right. Maximum warp 6. Sulu, remember when we got out of the way of the Romulans? We went to warp 9.
It was just a couple of weeks ago.
Punch it. Punch it, Sulu.
But now we've used up 15 hours and 20 minutes, leaving 8 hours and 40 minutes of our 24 hours. And suddenly we lost the trail. We had this great ion trail. It's gone. We've showed up at this system, the star system. The ship went somewhere there. And I think this scene is a really good Star Trek scene.
I love it. Why, you tell me what's going on here.
So basically what we're going to do, and what's interesting about it is normally we would have the group deducing logically an answer would be Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. Mm-hmm. And now we have Kirk with Chekhov, Sulu, and Uhura trying to figure out which of these 3 planets the ship was most likely to land on. And we get information of each of these 3 planets, none of which have the proper technology to make the ship. The first, I like, by the way, that Chekhov says,
the one on the left, number 3, rates letter B on the industrial scale.
Earth equivalent approximately 1485.
And I'm like, 1485 is not approximate. That's specific. It's pretty specific. And then we go, the next planet is level G, which is around the year 2030.
Which we're almost at.
That's true. It's very scary. And we don't have anything like ion propulsion, which means that Sulu's right when he says,
but that ship, Captain, either was many years ahead of us, or it was the most incredible design fluke in history.
And then we go to the third planet, which is in a glacial age. There are life forms, but it's totally primitive. And we go, which of these 3 planets is it most likely that this ship came from?
Now, as I understand you, Mr. Chekhov, there are 3 Class M planets.
Yes, sir.
Not one of which is capable of launching an interstellar flight.
No, sir.
Yet one of them accomplished it.
Yes, sir.
So what's interesting is that Chekhov picks one planet, I think the first planet. Mm-hmm. Sulu picks the second planet, and it's actually Uhura who picks up a regular source of energy from the third planet, which is actually planet 6. It's Sigma Draconis 6 is actually the planet that Uhura is referring to.
It could be natural. Volcanic activity, steam, any of a number of causes. But it's very regular.
And Kirk has to make a very difficult decision. And this actually I really like. First of all, I love that the 4 of them put their heads together and really played to each of their strengths and talked it through. It was such a great showing of teamwork among the main crew that you're right. It's usually just Kirk and Spock deciding these things, or maybe Scotty's on the bridge, or maybe McCoy is on the bridge for a moment. But to have Uhura and Chekhov and Sulu all weigh in on this, I think this is another another element of Spock's brain that makes it extremely worthy, because moments like this were really few and far between in the original series. And again, we're still in the first act. So for Act 1, for the teaser in Act 1, despite the overabundance of the use of the words Spock's brain, the teaser in Act 1 are very, very, very strong. So based on Uhura's information, and Kirk has to decide, we're only going to get one shot at this. We only have, 8 hours and 40 minutes left. We're not going to be able to go to each planet. We got to pick the right one. So Kirk has to play a hunch, and he hunches that the third planet that they were talking about, which is Sigma Draconis 6, is the one that they are going to go to. And Kirk says,
I guess wrong. Mr. Spock is dead. Spock will die.
I think it's a good end of an act, and I like this puzzle. I think this is an interesting. We have 3 planets. Logically, we might want to pick the most technologically advanced, but since none of them can make this ship, we're going to pick the least technologically advanced because it has something mysterious, which is this powerful energy source that doesn't fit there. And I'm like, that is a good Star Trek puzzle, and I agree with you. I like the fact that we have these other characters that are being able to be involved.
So far, so good in Spock's brain. Even though I know what's coming, having seen the episode many times before, though certainly not recently, I was still like, wow, the teaser in Act 1 are extremely strong. And some other notes, like I mentioned, that just like with Amok Time, Kirk is pulling out all the stops to save Spock. Now, in the first...
Well, I don't know. So I'll push back on that one just a little bit.
Okay.
Because what's the alternative? In Amok Time, he's under pressure from Starfleet, and he's going to give up his career in order to save Spock. And here, there's nothing like that. So I don't know what stops he's pulling out. He's doing... It seems like normal behavior. There's no sacrifice here.
Yeah, he's doing what he should be doing. He just has 8 hours and 40 minutes left to do it, so he has one chance to pick the planet right. But in the first outline that Kuhn wrote... Kirk, Spock, and McCoy were exploring a small asteroid when Spock is separated and his brain is taken, and a particle trail leads the Enterprise to the planet Nephel, which is populated by passive little men led by Irvan. That's the name of the character, Irvan, and they need Spock's brain to run their life support systems. So some elements from that outline did make it to the finished product. Bob Justman, who was now a co-producer, had some ideas that were in, he was acting like a producer, because at this point, when he was working and giving notes on the outlines, Fred Freiberger wasn't the new producer yet. And Bob Justman thought he was going to take over from John Meredith Lucas and be the new showrunner.
Right.
That didn't happen. But it was Bob Justman's idea. So instead of exploring an asteroid, he said, you know what, we should start the teaser on the Enterprise, and we should have the entire crew pass out, and we should have multiple planets for Kirk to choose from, increasing the stakes and the tension. All those ideas were Bob Justman's, and they were incorporated into the final draft teleplay.
So it's Act 2. We beam down. We're with Chekhov, Kirk, Scotty, and a couple of red guys.
Yep.
We talk about, so we're on this planet. I like, by the way, that the psych on this planet is like a pale blue, because we've had these purple ones and red ones, and this is like, A, closer to sky, and B, reinforces the fact that it's cold.
Yes. That the sky was, they didn't use that red or orange, that they use so many times to depict an alien landscape. They have 8 hours and 29 minutes left. And Gene Roddenberry, at this point, he was still very involved, a lot more involved than he probably is given credit for, since people said that, he just totally left the series in the dust. But it was Roddenberry's idea to have Chekhov be a part of the landing party. And, Roddenberry really wanted to make Chekhov a more prominent player. And the season started like that was going to happen, because, look at his role in Spectre of the Gun. But, as the season went on, the only other time he really had a substantial part was in The Way to Eden. But I also like, when they first beam down to the planet, instead of Spock being with them, obviously, Scotty is with them, and Scotty's got the tricorder.
Life form readings, Mr. Spock? Mr. Scott?
You mentioned at the very beginning the idea of Kirk having to go without Spock.
Mm-hmm.
And this moment is the only moment where we see that. that would have been a really interesting, like, for instance, on that previous scene that we both like on the bridge, if we had actually said something about, normally Mr. Spock would help me with this, but then he depends on the rest of his crew, and made it more obvious, I think that would have been interesting.
Yeah,
but that theme of Kirk without Spock, that's not something we're actually going to deal with. It's not really
a shame.
in the show.
We should be dealing with that, because that's the two of them together are, they are, the whole of the two of them is greater than the sum of their parts. And if there was a moment in the end of the first act where Kirk was feeling helpless and hopeless because Spock wasn't there to advise him, and then you have Chekhov and Sulu and Uhura step up and help him make the right decision, that would have had a better payoff. It's still a great moment. It's still a great scene.
Yeah.
But you're right. I think that just that was I would say a few rewrites away, but one more rewrite would have helped in that regard.
Yeah.
Scattered, widely spaced. Humanoid, all right, on the large side.
And at that moment, we see this big guy with a big beard and sort of primitive clothes sneaking around behind the rocks.
And this is also when the score, Fred Steiner's score, takes a turn for the worse. Like, I'm not crazy about the music that's played when these giant Neanderthal men type are sneaking behind the rocks. It's a little too on the nose as to depict a primitive culture.
I had forgotten how much we see of these big guys kind of grouping together and mounting their attack on our Enterprise crew. I'd forgotten that that's sort of set up that way. I don't know that if I feel it's neither good nor bad. We get a funny joke, by the way, of
temperature, a high maximum of 40, livable.
You have a thick skin.
Yeah, well, Chekhov is from Russia, so of course 40 degrees is livable.
And now we realize our sensors say that these primitive men are coming in to attack, and we have us setting up for defense with our phasers set to stun because we want to be able to talk to them. And this is totally an example that it ends up being a pretty weak and boring kind of action sequence that could have been an interesting one. What happens is the big guys come in, they're all terrible with their weapons. They are nowhere threatening. They miss everybody. It's weak. And then we stun one of them and the rest of them run away. Whereas if they had surprised our guys and maybe were in hand-to-hand combat and took out a red guy and then it would be more exciting, but it isn't.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like if they threw a spear at like one of the red shirts. And meanwhile, the red shirts they beamed down with. None of the red shirts died in this episode. Yeah, they're fine.
This is, like a basic rule of adventure stories is you're always supposed to make your bad guys more scary than your good guys.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, and so our guys have this huge technological advantage. Well, then if you want to make it exciting, you have to limit their technological advantage,
Right.
Like but they didn't make it exciting. So we stun this one guy and he is groggy, and then we're going to have a conversation with him.
You are not the others.
So this guy, this native, his name's James Darris, is the name of the actor, and you might recognize him or not from shows like I Dream of Jeannie, Mannix, Police Story, and appropriately, Land of the Giants.
Okay.
We are men.
Men?
Like yourselves.
There's always this is not an objection or a criticism really, but we depend a lot upon the universal translator, making all this stuff make sense.
That is a big flaw in this episode. Now, look, it's a science fiction series. You got to. And
we're all speaking English.
We're all speaking English.
Yeah.
But in this case, the fact that they're on this purely alien world, they're actually exploring a strange new world, and they speak English is jarring, just like it was jarring when they were on Gamma Trianguli 6 and they meet the Valians. And he says to Kirk, "You hit me with your hand." In fact, this whole exchange feels very much like the Apple.
Well, I think there's real similarities with the Apple and ones that we will talk about. Here's the thing about the universal. So I can accept, because we have to accept this idea that we have this thing called the universal translator, and basically wherever we go, it makes it so it seems like everybody speaks English. And that's just because we can't spend our whole life translating in every single episode. That would just, it would take too long. I'm okay with that. But when you get into the idea is that There are basic concepts, and we all understand these concepts, and so we create the words for those concepts. But the morgue have no concept of men and women. So what is happening here when we say, oh, we're men or you're men, and where are the women? Well, they don't have that concept. So this is where the whole construct of the universal translator, A, falls down, and B, we're on a ship who's boldly going where no one has gone before. We should expect that other alien races don't have the same concepts. So Kirk, both in this and the Apple, going, well, where are the children? Where, men and women, all this stuff, being so shocked that they don't know what he's talking about. It's like, you're on an alien planet, Like, why would you expect that these things would be the same?
Absolutely, right.
You are small, like the others.
Who are the others?
The givers of pain and delight.
This primitive culture has a very good vocabulary, by the way.
Yeah, they sure do.
You will see. The others will come for you.
And this is where Kirk asks about women, which there's no idea what he's talking about.
Don't you have a mate?
Kirk is really obsessed with men and women and mating.
Yeah,
when he meets
really
up with these primitive cultures.
Why does that surprise you, Steve?
Well, it's just going, okay, I'm searching for a dude's brain. Why is this my first question? Like,
will you take us where we can find the others?
And this freaks him out.
Yep.
No one wants to find them.
We do. We want to find them. Take us there and we'll let you go.
And that is when Chekhov realizes that while there's no industrialization or buildings or anything on the surface of this planet, there is something huge 500 meters under the surface.
Right.
And he goes, well, let's go find it. And this is where our primitive guy just freaks out.
No, you're not going there.
It's all right.
No.
And he runs away. They let him go. So we're going to head over to where this reading is coming from. And we end up at this cave entrance. We go inside. And there's like food there and piles of weapons. And we also see this weird light.
A very advanced form of technology on a planet that is by and large extremely primitive.
Well, and even the weapons that are there are way beyond the technology that our primitive people could have made.
It could be a warning device to keep those creatures away from the food.
Or the food could be a lure set by the others to bring them in here.
In other words, this is a trap. And this trap, that seems like a good idea.
If it will trap the creatures for the others, Captain, won't it trap us too?
Exactly.
And he calls up to the Enterprise and asks McCoy to beam down. And there McCoy beams down with Mr. Spock.
And this, to me, is the turning point of this episode. This is the moment of Spock's brain where there's just no turning back to recover and to end on a high note. So McCoy has beamed down with Spock. Spock, for some reason, is wearing the outfit that he wore in This Side of Paradise.
Yep.
As one of the colonists. Maybe he just had it, in his quarters. I don't know. And why even put him in that outfit? Why not just put him in his regular uniform? I have no idea.
Was he naked? Wasn't he was he, when he was on the table, wasn't he still in the uniform?
I don't remember.
No, it's literally like, no, it makes no sense to have put him in a different set of clothes.
But Spock has this contraption around his head, and McCoy, in order to direct Spock and have him move, is using like a remote control, basically. And he starts pushing buttons on the remote control, and Spock beams down in a profile, and he turns to face Kirk. And this is the camera zooms in really fast on Spock wearing like his headphones, basically. And the music sting on it is just supposed to convey shock, but it's funny. It made me laugh for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, no, it's terrible. It has all the disadvantages of being slow. The whole thing takes a really long time. It doesn't make any sense. Like McCoy just said, I don't have any of the technology to hook up a brain or take apart a brain. But apparently in the last 15 hours, I could build a device that totally controls a human body like a robot and controls it with this little remote that has 10 buttons and 3 knobs, it's just like, come on.
And also, so when he directs Spock to walk forward, there's this clicking sound.
Yeah.
And like, why is there a clicking sound? Spock is not a robot. He's still a flesh and blood human being. He's just without a brain. So what is making the clicking sound? I mean, it's just,
I really wonder what Nimoy thought of this, because it's like, I can see where they went, oh, well, we don't want to do this mission without Spock. How could we bring Spock along? Because what you could do was find Spock's brain and then beam the body down to do the surgery. There was no reason. And because that's why I go back to that line of Kirk saying, well, we'll have to bring him with us. Because the only explanation I have is what he's saying is we have to turn Spock into an automaton that can walk around wherever we go, which is just totally ridiculous.
Yeah, it really is. It really, ridiculous is exactly what this moment is. And no matter how much you suspend disbelief watching Star Trek, this goes off the rails.
Yeah. So we slowly walk into the cave and triggers that light. And suddenly this is a giant elevator and we're speeding downwards. And I like McCoy's line.
Call Chekhov and tell him to send my stomach down.
Yeah.
Up on the surface, Chekhov pulls the old Sulu naked time move of heating up some rocks with a phaser because they're going to hang out there. And we're back in the elevator. And now Scotty takes a reading that there's massive power there, enough power to push this planet out of orbit. Kirk asks about the source, and he says,
either a nuclear pile 100 miles across or ion power.
So what does that mean? We found the right place.
Yep.
And we slowly slow down. The doors open, and there in front of the door is this woman. We see her reach to push a button, and Kirk stuns her.
And that is Luma. She's another one of the iMorg, played by Sheila Layton. And she was on TV in shows like The Green Hornet, Hogan's Heroes, and The Odd Couple.
It's very hard to tell with her whether her performance is bad because she's a bad actress or because she was directed to play really dumb and it just comes off as bad.
Right.
But for me, either way, it's not good.
I agree. So it's not a great character and not a great performance either way.
You do not belong here. You are not Morg.
Take me to the one in charge. I wish to speak to him.
And I think this is another real problem with this episode. What they decided is that for whatever reason, and I have some theories about this that we'll get into later, but this culture who lives beneath the surface everything is taken care of them to such a high degree that they're all totally mentally atrophied into a childlike state.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you believe that had they been raised, if Luma was raised in the Federation, that she would be really dumb, or that she's just a normal person?
Well, that's a great question.
In other words, is it nature or nurture that has made her so childlike?
If she's a humanoid and she has the power to speak and the power to doll herself up and get dressed up really nice, I think it's a circumstance. I think that in the right environment, she would have been more intelligent.
I think that I agree. I think the implication of the show is that under different circumstances, all of these people are totally capable of more. And I think that's a real problem because it just saying people are stupid, it's not a good character motivation. Mm-hmm. Like, they've been living lives here. They must have interests. They must be doing stuff. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, they just went, no, everyone's just kind of a moron, you know? And that doesn't make for interesting character building. And Kirk is trying to get information about Spock's brain.
What have you done with Spock's brain? Where have you taken it?
Now, asking a person who doesn't know the name Spock what you did with Spock's brain is the nonsensical question, but we're going to keep repeating brain and Spock's brain over and over again.
Yeah. It's just, it's cringe-inducing every time they say Spock's brain.
You are not Morg or I'm Morg. I know nothing about a brain.
You're lying.
And Kirk is getting kind of rough with her. And finally, McCoy says,
"It's not, Jim. No change in reading. She doesn't know."
And now Kirk changes his tactics and tries to play a little nicer. Gets that her name is Luma, that she's an iMorg, and she tries to go. They grab her, and then we hear
fascinating activity without end, but with no volition.
Spock's voice is coming out of the communicator, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm. So they are definitely in the right place.
Absolutely. I also think it's a nitpick, but like just this idea of somehow they randomly get Spock's voice on their communicator is weak.
Yep, it is.
And it's also weird, by the way, that he's looking at the body of Spock while talking to Spock. And it almost is the implication that when he's closer to the body, he gets a better reading from Spock. Did you get that impression?
I just got the impression that his way of talking to Spock was looking at the body of Spock while he was talking to him through the communicator.
Okay. That makes sense.
I don't think the Wi-Fi was better once he got closer to Spock.
Where are you, Spock?
Is that you, Dr. McCoy? And are you with the captain?
Where else would I be?
Mr. Spock, where are you?
And this is, some little cute dialogue.
We'll get you, Spock. It won't be long.
Practical idea, Captain. It seems unlikely that I shall be able to get to you.
I wish there was more thought. Like the experience of what is it like to be a disembodied brain inside of this controller thing. That's an interesting science fiction idea. And there wasn't a lot of thought put into what is Spock experiencing, Who is he without his body? Like, it would be interesting. Like, here's an interesting thought is what if Spock's emotions, those human emotions that he's been struggling with, are linked to being within his body? And now that he is out of his body, he no longer has any conflict with the human side. He is become the totally logical creature that he always wanted to be.
Or not.
And that's the thing, is that maybe he went, I don't have any emotions. I don't have any feel. Like, what if he said, Captain, I recognize your voice, but I have no feeling towards you.
Well,
and then wasn't happy. You know what I mean? Like,
there's a lot that's unexplored, but doesn't Spock say later that he's has the sensation of pumping blood?
Yes. Yeah.
And Kirk says, "Oh, maybe you're actually controlling the ventilation of their life support systems," and that Spock says, "I feel like I'm going off into infinity," because he doesn't have the constraints of a flesh and blood body, but the voiceover, the ADR that Nimoy had to do for these moments, he's doing the best he can with the material that he is given. You asked before, you said, I wonder what Nimoy thought of this episode. Well, I'll tell you later, but what I can't say now is that he was not fond of it. And he felt like, well, I really don't have much to do with this episode. So he thought, well, I'm just going to play it cool and like I always do, but then play it even cooler. He was okay with the fact that there really wasn't much for Spock to do. And even though he didn't care for the episode, he felt that because of what was happening with Spock, the fact that he was only able to be controlled by McCoy, like he felt like he was protected in some way. Like it wasn't like he had to do something out of character. He felt like he was protected because of the constraints for this episode of his performance.
That is very interesting. I mean, having the gig where your only job is to just walk around stiffly through an entire episode, that's not that interesting as an actor.
No, definitely not.
I want to just go back because I'm thinking about it more and more. And if I were to do a rewrite, this is the rewrite I would do of what if essentially Spock becoming the controller was like him going through the Kolinar, that he now is totally purged of all emotions, and that he is now because I said, how do we make this personal? Well, what if Spock has suddenly gotten everything that he thinks he wants, and that is totally being devoid of emotions, and now he doesn't like it?
Wait a minute. I'm going to take this one step further, Steve. Here you have a living person, Spock, whose brain, his source of his intelligence, has been implanted into a machine. We've seen this happen already to some extent with Landru in Return of the Archons.
There you go.
Okay, but in that case, Landru was controlling the society for almost like his own amusement, with having like the festival and having them be really chill the rest of the time and being of the body. In this case, Spock's essence and his brain, his physical brain, being inside the computer system, because that wasn't the case with Landru. Landru programmed, so much of himself into that computer, but his brain wasn't in that computer. Spock's brain is in this computer. But either way, you're right. If his brain is not in his body, his half Vulcan, half human body, What's keeping Spock from being half Vulcan, half human? Nothing. He could be as Vulcan as he chooses to be without the temptations of his humanity, or he can be as human as he wants to be without the shame of betraying his Vulcan heritage.
Well, and let's take it even further, because now I'm excited. Now I think, now Spock's brain as an episode is becoming an interesting episode. So what if we take this further? Right now, the conflict is I have to overcome the iMorg in order to get the technology to put Spock's brain back in his body. That's the conflict.
Right.
What if instead the conflict is Kirk has to convince Spock to return to his body? Like right now, Spock has essential immortality, 10,000 years at least. He has access to the greatest store of knowledge that's beyond anything ever in human life. He could spend those 10,000 years learning and studying, that he can use sensors to see everything that goes on this planet. It's like the scientist part of Spock, the logical part of Spock has everything that he could ever have wanted. But he no longer has his human side. He no longer has mortality and connection with other humans, connection with his friends, and that Kirk has to convince Spock to make the choice to become Spock again.
So just like he had to convince Spock to make the choice to purge himself of the spores.
Yes.
And assume his duty again.
It becomes, you know what it
paradise.
is?
Yeah.
In this scenario, this is the opposite of this side of paradise. Paradise is where Spock gets to embrace his emotions and then has to reject that in order to come back here. And our new version of Spock's brain is Spock becomes the purely logical machine side of himself and now has to reject that because the true Spock, the great Spock, is the one that combines those things.
That's a great point. And how many times has McCoy referred to Spock as a machine?
Yep.
Or where Spock says, "Why, thank you, Doctor."
Yep.
You know,
exactly.
So, yeah. So,
yes.
So okay, I'm loving this rewrite, Steve Morris.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that in order to make Spock's brain a better episode, other than changing the title from Spock's brain to something else, you have the episode itself, the plot of it is not to find his brain and put it back in his body, but to convince Spock that he belongs back in his body.
That he, as a person that is half human, half Vulcan, is a unique, wonderful individual with his own destiny, and that he wants to be that person.
And that being that person will be more rewarding to him than basically being the machine that McCoy always accused him of. Literally being that machine. Right.
Right.
I love it.
Yeah. Well, and again, and you know, at this point now, I actually might call it Spock's brain. Like the title Spock's brain actually kind of feels better to me because we're dealing with this idea of, is Spock just a walking intelligence? Is he just a brain? Is that all he is? Is his body matter? Does our existence within the physical world matter? Like all of those things. And it goes back to interesting science fiction ideas and something that's personal. This has now become personal.
I propose that its title be changed under the new Steve Morris rewrite from Spock's brain to be or not to be.
Okay.
Okay, is a Shakespearean title. We've used many Shakespearean titles before, and coming up in the original Star Trek. So I'm steering away from this whole morgue, brain, what is brain thing. And I am going with you in this trajectory of making the episode that they find Spock or they find his brain and his essence and everything, and that he is quite happy where he is, and that this is like what he has always wanted. And then Kirk, just like Kirk talked him out of paradise, he has to talk him out of this, what he sees as a new paradise, with something he thinks he always wanted, but is actually not.
So two quick things. So one is that then the end of probably Act 3 is we've done all this effort and adventure to get to Spock's brain, and we're right at the point where we found him and are ready to put him back in his body. And at the end of Act 3, Spock says no.
Right. He says, "No, Captain, I'm staying here.
I'm staying here." That's great. Second thing. So you went to Shakespeare, you went to Hamlet, To Be or Not to Be for the title. Mm-hmm. How about this from the same speech? This mortal coil.
Oh, that's perfect. That, by the way, even just as the episode as it is, this mortal coil is much better title than
much
Spock's
better.
brain. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, but needless to say, that is not what's happening, because right now, as we're talking to Luma, around the corner, the woman that we saw in the teaser of the episode, Kara, comes around. Kirk is immediately on her.
There she is. That's the one. What have you done with Spock's brain? What have you done?
And she hits a button on her bracelet that wipes them all out.
She knocks everybody out just like she did when they were on the bridge.
Except for Spock.
Except Spock is standing there because what's to knock out? Because, his brain isn't in his body. So as we get into the beginning of Act 3, Captain's log, he refers to the planet, which up to this point was Sigma Dracona 6. Mm-hmm. In his captain's log at the beginning of Act 3, he refers to it as Sigma Dracona 7.
Oh.
So the point being is that they were not paying attention.
This is Sigma Dracona 7?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. That's a Wrath of Khan reference, folks. But no, somebody wasn't paying attention. The script supervisor was saying, oh, well, you call it Sigma Dracona 7 here, but it's actually Sigma Dracona 6. So
that's one they shouldn't have, because that's probably not the script supervisor, because the log is done in ADR in post, so there's no script supervisor around.
Right.
It's one thing to mess it up on the set. It's another thing to mess it up in post. That's a bigger mess up.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
It's so funny when I see things where I am very aware of the fact that I watched edited versions of these things as a kid for television.
How so?
Because the shots of them where they're feeding the men and things like that, I was like, I never saw that. I don't think that was in the earlier versions. And there's the moment where you see Luma kind of mime what happened to her and getting knocked out, and it's terrible. Because what they did, I'm sure that that Mark Daniels went to her and said, listen, we're not going to hear what you're saying, so just sort of pantomime it. And so she pantomimes it in a way that no human would ever do, because they would be talking. It just is terrible. It's terrible. I'm glad I didn't see it when I was growing up as a kid.
You know what? I said before, previously in earlier episodes, podcast episodes of Enterprise Incidents, that when I was growing up watching Star Trek every night on Channel 17 in Philadelphia, that I was lucky enough to watch the full, complete cuts. It wasn't until I went to New York or, talked to friends in other cities. And like you, they were watching the stripped versions for syndication. So, watching these episodes much, much later and seeing all these extra scenes must have been pretty awesome.
Well, some of them were. Well, you know what, though? Some of them definitely. Some of them, there were things where it's like, oh, my God, this is key to the story. Watching Luma do her little pantomime, I didn't miss that much.
Yeah, right. Sure.
But we see all of our guys kind of slumped in their chairs wearing these big, huge belts with these big round belt buckles, except Spock, who's sitting perfectly upright. And there is Kara, and they sit down. She pushes some button, and all of our guys wake up.
What are you? Why are you here?
It's interesting, her performance, because she's playing a very childlike, innocent thing.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Which kind of works, and mostly for me doesn't. Because the thing is, here's the thing. She's the leader of this group of people, and just because she doesn't understand her technology doesn't mean that leaders don't have to do stuff. Like living life, you're going to interact with other people and have thoughts and have... You know what I mean?
I'm just curious, like what society established this world where the men are living as Neanderthals on the surface and the women are living beneath the surface in miniskirts, and they have the mind of a child, and they need this teacher device put on their heads to have 3 hours of supreme intelligence. Who set that up?
Funny you should ask, Scott, because I have a whole theory, and I was debating when exactly should I bring up this theory, and now you have given me the opportunity.
The door has been opened.
Like many things, this theory is totally not based in anything that they were thinking when they made this show. Right. But this started to come into my brain when we were talking about the Paradise Syndrome, and we were talking about the similarities with the Paradise Syndrome and the apple, and the idea that there was these preservers who went around and seeded different planets and then set up things to protect those planets. Here's the thought that I had. And I'm not going to make this political in any way, But here's the thing that always bugs me about the way we do stuff, which is we have different political groups that believe different stuff. And so maybe you believe that we want to have a national healthcare system. Maybe you want private healthcare system. Maybe you think that we need minimum wages. Maybe you don't. And the way we debate these things is that one person adamantly says, I want this, and the other adamantly says they want that. And then they try to make that happen. And if it doesn't work or it does work, they say, well, we need to lower the taxes even further. We need to raise the taxes even more. What a scientist does when they have an idea is they go, I believe that if I do this, this will happen. They then run an experiment and then they look at the data and see what actually happened. That's not what we ever do in our world. We never just go like, I don't know what's going to happen if we raise the taxes. Let's do it. Let's do it over here. See what happens. Take that data and use that to inform future decisions. Right.
Right.
So this is the thought that I had. What if I were this supremely powerful civilization and I dealt with all these problems and I wanted to find out what would be the best society? Well, maybe I would set up different civilizations with different models and run different experiments. So maybe one model I would set up and I would say, look, let's not have anyone mate. Let's have everybody be immortal, and we're going to remove sex entirely from the equation, and we're going to have everything provided and that's going to be primitive, and they're going to worship this thing, and let's see how that society does. And that'll be the servants of all. And then this other society, it's like, let's leave them very much alone, a primitive society, but we're going to make sure they're going to be protected from big natural disasters. So we're going to build this obelisk,
right.
And that's the Paradise Syndrome.
Right.
And then another one, we go, maybe the problem is men and women being together. And so we're going to separate them out. And in each of these cases, we have ways that to interfere, which is that we got the main servant of all who has his little antenna, so he can get information when things go wrong, if they have to make changes. We have the medicine chief who can go into the obelisk and they get hit by the memory beam, which gives them information in order to protect their planet in case we need to mess with things a little bit. And here we have the teacher, which is the same thing. Which is, and so what I go in is like, what if the preservers were actually running different experiments on humanoids to see what the best way to live life is? What happens if we don't have mating and children? Yeah. What happens if men and women are separate? What happens if they're living this primitive lifestyle? And how will that, and then we're going to go back and we're going to check in every once in a while on these civilizations. And now we have real experiments on how humans work. And of course, Kirk comes along and messes up all those experiments because that's what he does. But that is my new theory about how all of this came about.
I think that's a terrific theory. And I definitely thought about a couple of things during your philosophy right there. When I was watching the episode, when I was watching Spock's Brain again, is that the teacher device is very similar to the device inside the obelisk in the Paradise Syndrome that's supposed to give whoever's using it the knowledge to operate it so it can deflect incoming asteroids. So now the obelisk is basically the same, serving the same function that we have here with the teacher.
Right.
And I wondered if at some point the society, the Morg and the Imorg, going back many, many, many generations, if they are descendants of the preservers.
I think there's a good possibility. And I think we could pick which of these experiments do we think is running the best?
Yeah.
I don't think Morg and Imorg are running well at all.
Not at all.
I think that's real problems, So I think,
I think of these three, the humanoid race on in the Paradise Syndrome is doing better than the others. I mean, they're still in a primitive state, but they're progressing along. Okay. They're not living in a state of arrested development like the Valiant.
Well, we don't know. I'd say we don't know because we don't know how long they've been at that level.
That's true. Yep.
Could be 100,000 years. I don't know.
Yeah. Right.
But they seem, the thing about them, it's hard for me. I think the servants of all, they seem totally happy.
Yeah, they did.
I don't see it. Whereas Salish is clearly not a happy guy.
No, he's not.
So I see, but I also go, the Paradise Syndrome, that's the most like us. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
They're living a way that we can really understand. So to be clear, they get to have sex. So I'd probably rather hang out with the Paradise Syndrome people as much as the servants of all seem very, very happy.
Right. You're definitely not, the Morgs of the planet's surface describe the Imorg, the women, as the givers of pain and delight. What's the delight?
Well, they get to have sex. I mean, I assume. I mean, that's how we're going to propagate the species. I'm sure that's the delight.
Yeah.
But the circumstances don't sound. I mean, depending on what your kink is, I guess it depends on what you're into. But Morgan Imorg doesn't seem like that much fun to me.
No.
But we're awake, and they start asking questions. And Kirk immediately says,
"What have you done with Spock's brain?"
Oh, there's that line again.
It's just terrible. It's just like, come on.
We do not know Spock.
This is Spock. You saw him on the ship. You have his brain.
Again, stop saying brain.
Yeah.
Someone has to have a count of how many times they use brain, the word brain in this episode.
Somebody, whoever's listening, and we hope a lot of people are listening, of course, let us know. We would love for someone to use a counter to clock the number of times the word brain is used in this episode. Hit us up on our Facebook page at Enterprise Incidents and let us know.
So here's another writing tip: is when you have a conversation going nowhere, and the whole point is the conversation is going nowhere, don't have that conversation go on too long.
This conversation goes on way too long.
Well, and we already had this exact conversation with Luma already. So it's like, okay, we get it. She doesn't know. Finally, Jim interrupts in exactly the same way he did with Luma. She probably doesn't know. And then they change their tactic.
I wish to talk to those in charge.
In charge?
Yes, the organizers, the managers. The leader of your people.
I am leader. There is no other.
That's impossible.
It's, you're dealing with a new society. It seems rude to be talking to someone and say, you're not the leader, when she obviously is.
Who built the machines?
Who are the doctors? Who operate?
Who controls this complex?
Control. Controller?
Yes, the controller. And she's like, it's not permitted to see the controller. And I think there's another moment where the word brain is used.
Yep.
And at exactly 27 minutes, 33 seconds into Spock's brain, we hear the classic line,
brain and brain, what is brain?
Awful line.
Well, and this is the difference between this and The Children Shall Lead. I find The Children Shall Lead excruciatingly boring and painful. This is stupid.
Yeah, it is.
There's just a difference. Well, and this is why it gets mocked. There's nothing, no one would care to do a satire of And the Children Shall Lead. You know what I mean?
Right.
This is satirable.
It's absolutely ripe for the picking, so to speak,
yep,
in terms of being an episode to make fun of and lampoon. Now, I've heard for many years, and I've read in many books, including, of course, These Are the Voyages, that at one point, because this episode was written by Gene Kuhn, who had written A Piece of the Action,
right,
and he was the showrunner at the time of I, Mud and The Trouble with Tribbles, and he is the producer who added levity to a series that was very, very serious, that they, specifically Bob Justman, said, maybe we should make this more of a comedy. Maybe we should make this more humorous. But it was actually Fred Freiberger, who said no. Now, regardless of whether they leaned into the comedy or not, it kind of does get humorous, especially by the end of the fourth act. So here's an episode that starts off very serious, and then it gets to a point where it kind of flips and becomes something more humorous. That worked really well in By Any Other Name. The first 2.5 acts of that episode are fantastic, very suspenseful, a lot of action, big stakes, and then the moment that they decide to sort of play up the emotions to bring out the emotions and the Kelvins to kind of make them more alien when they get back, then it becomes a humorous episode, and the shifted tones works. But in the case of Spock's brain, it doesn't work because at a point when there should have been a more humorous shift in tone, they got cold feet and they didn't quite go there. And for the rest of this episode, it's a war with itself.
So, there's that famous quote that I think is Edmund Gwenn, maybe an actor on his deathbed, who said, dying is easy, comedy is hard.
Yeah.
The reason this stuff doesn't work as comedy is because it's not funny. Like, there's a weird thing that would happen when I was teaching film school, and I'll make the digression very, very short, which is that people would make a terrible movie, and because student films are largely terrible, and then all the students watching it would laugh and go, "Oh my God, that movie's so funny," because it was terrible. And it's like, no, it only seems funny because you're watching your friends act in a terrible movie that you all made together. If I showed this to anyone else, it's just bad. This is not funny. Yeah. Like Kirk doing Fizbin, that's funny. Scotty drinking the Kelvin under the table is funny. Saying Spock's brain over and over again is bad, and we can laugh at it. That is not the same as doing good.
At it, not with it.
Exactly.
Yep.
And then, it's funny. We talked over and over again about Kirk's ability to adapt, his ability to see a weakness or figure out a new strategy in the spur of a moment. This is like the worst. He gets down on his knees and arms in the air and goes,
"Great leader, we come from a far place to learn from your controller."
It's terrible.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. It's almost embarrassing when Kirk gets on his knees and begs.
Well, and it doesn't work and it doesn't go anywhere. So why do it? And he starts to insist, because the thing didn't go anywhere. And then she hits the pain button on her wrist. And we've said a lot of actors, and particularly Shatner, have had to do a lot of "I am being mystically tortured by something" from Dagger of the Mind and Gamesters of Triskelion and many, many, many times. This is the worst.
This is the worst. And by the way, those collars, those belts of obedience are very similar to the collars of obedience.
Right.
The episode you just mentioned, Gamesters of Triskelion. In fact, in an earlier version of the screenplay, they actually had these collars, but they were like, and it was the producers who said, "Hey, let's put these things around their neck." And it was like the actors who said, "We already did this last season." So they watched Gamesters of Triskelion and said, "Oh yeah, we got to switch it. Make it around their waist instead of around their neck."
So they all go out. Kara says, "I must learn what to do," and exits. We have a brief check-in with Sulu and Chekhov that doesn't add anything to the story. We come back as our guys wake up.
But it doesn't add anything to the story. But it is worth noting that once again we have Sulu in command of the Enterprise. And the point being is that for the first and only time during the original series, we hear Sulu give a ship's log. That was cool.
That is cool. You're right. Okay, I'm good with that. Our guys wake up talking about just how darn painful this was, which of course Spock had no reaction to. They try to get out, and one of the big morgues stand in their way, and they start speculating on how this place is functioning. We see that on a table, all of their devices are sitting. Are there phasers on that table?
They're communicators.
Communicators. But their phasers were separated out for some reason.
Right, yes. But the communicators are just sitting there, just wide open.
Yep.
Pain and delight, he said up above.
I'm sure you noticed the delight aspect of this place.
Yes, I certainly did notice those delightful aspects.
All right, we get the joke.
How does Spock's brain fit into this?
With the communicator, we might be able to find out.
And he goes over to the table where the communicators are, and the big morgue steps in front of them.
This fellow is keeping us from our property.
Humorous tone. It's a humorous tone that feels very I Mud.
Yep. No, totally. But this could have been in I Mud. This could have been a piece of the action. And I like this. I think this is a good, not great, but good sequence.
Well, isn't there a way to correct that situation?
I certainly think that science might provide an answer.
It does, Captain.
Agreed, Doctor.
And we get into a big fight. And we take out all the guys. We have your typical Kirk moves in here.
Yep, a couple of drop kicks.
Yep. And he gets on his communicator.
Have you returned to the Enterprise?
No. We might be able to locate you if you gave us some idea of what they were using you for. Is it medical?
I'm not certain. I seem to have a body which stretches into infinity.
And now, for the first time, we cut to this weird black rectangular thing with these white tubes coming out of it.
It looks a little bit like the cloaking device.
There's definitely some cloaking device there.
Yep.
And it's a weird directorial choice. I understand why they did it. That we're going to cut back as we go, okay, that's where Spock is.
Right, yeah.
Why are you endangering your lives by coming here?
We came to put you back. Where are you?
Back where?
Back into your body.
Thoughtful, Captain. But probably impractical.
They talk about restoring the brain, and that's where he asks about the time that's elapsed.
Dr. McCoy must have told you that 24 hours is the maximum my body can be.
I told them.
And it's like, how does Spock know about the absolute maximum time limit on keeping a body alive from a brain that's been perfectly removed from the body when that's never happened before? You know?
Right.
Beam us a signal so we can home in on you.
Acknowledged.
How does Kirk know that Spock can beam him a signal? How does Spock beam him a signal? Why didn't we bring this up when we first talked to Spock?
Great questions, right?
But now we have a homing device, so we're very slowly going to walk out. Like, this is the other thing about the choice to have Spock with us, is it slows everything down.
This whole act is slowed down. Even with a fight in it, this act feels like it is very slow.
And while we walk, they ask Spock, hey, how do we get the devices off?
The red button on a bracelet releases them. I know that does not make much sense.
Oh, yes, it does, Spock.
Does Spock have access to all of the information?
I think he does. I mean, he's supposed to be controlling the planet, so he has to have control all that information.
So Spock knows how to restore a brain.
But the teacher and the controller are two different things. The controller is...
Right, but I'm asking,
controlling. But wait, the controller is controlling like the life support and just all the routine maintenance.
Right.
Okay, but it's the teacher. I think the teacher would have been needed to build the device that would house the controller. You know what I'm saying?
I do, but that's what this is the question I'm asking you.
Yeah.
Does Spock have access to all the information that the teacher has?
Well, the teacher. But that's the thing. That's what I don't think.
Because he later says it's a huge storehouse of information.
Right.
And he looked somewhere to find out that the red thing on the bracelet releases the pain things.
So maybe that's why Spock was able to tell McCoy how to finish up his brain.
Well, let's hold off on this but I think this is a weird. It's just not saying that there's parts of this episode that don't quite make sense is kind of obvious.
Yes.
That is, yeah. Anyway, we get to the door, we enter, and there is the controller. And just as they see the controller there, we also see Kara, who stuns them. And now, instead of immediately going out, for some reason, they're all still conscious. And McCoy is able to point out to Kirk that Spock is not affected. And then we watch Kirk slowly crawl over to the remote control for Spock and somehow use those 8 buttons while in the most agony any human can experience to have Spock walk over, grab the thing, push the correct buttons on her bracelet. I mean, have you ever tried to control like a remote control thing perfectly to do a thing like this?
And Kirk knows how to use the remote control that McCoy built.
I mean, it's all just seems dumb.
Yeah.
But he does use it. It releases their things. They all get up.
We will die. You must not take the controller away. We will all die.
And Kirk describes where Spock is, who says again,
Fascinating.
You say you're breathing, pumping blood, maintaining temperature. Is it possible that you're recirculating air, running heating plants, purifying water?
Indeed, Captain, that is unquestionably part of what I am doing.
I actually find this all kind of an interesting scientific sci-fi idea.
Yeah, I do too.
Now, you took his brain. You will put it back. How did you do it?
I do not know.
And again, we're in that same argument. And again, McCoy comes in and says, no, she can't know. And then finally she says it was the old knowledge.
How do you get the old knowledge?
I put upon my head the teacher.
What is a teacher?
The great teacher of all the ancient knowledge.
And this is when we see this weird salad bowl with, this transparent salad bowl with all these weird devices on it.
It just looks like something you would put on your head and gain knowledge from. That's it must be obvious to Kirk that that must be what they're talking about, the teacher.
If I may explain, Captain, she refers to the taped storehouse of knowledge of the builders of this place. I scan it. A most impressive store.
And they put it on her. And suddenly she stops talking. Lights go on. We hear sounds. Are some of the devices that's in this part of like the M5 unit from?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've repurposed a lot of stuff that was in their storage. I know you love that.
Absolutely. Well, it's so funny. I was just having a conversation with somebody. That's all of filmmaking. All of filmmaking is figuring out how do I do stuff for less money.
Yeah.
That is even on huge, big multi-million-dollar movies, they're still doing that. She opens her eyes. She's suddenly calm. Her whole character seems to have transformed.
Gentlemen, the controller's explanation of the functioning of the teacher is essentially correct. However, he is giving no credit to me. I provide the means whereby the knowledge is used.
What do you think of her transformation at this moment?
I think the actor is very good.
Yeah, I think she does a good job.
She does a really good job. I mean, look, she's someone else who had to give it her all, give it her best shot, and she goes through a really good transformation from being, having almost the mind of a child to now being a genius.
Well, what I find, and again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but here's an interesting thing of like, what she says in this moment is not giving enough credit to me, implies that her character is important in this transformation. But we see no evidence of her character, even without the knowledge, as when before. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if they had played it as this is a primitive group of people who don't understand technology, but they still can be intelligent and interesting and charismatic and powerful in their way, that would have made more sense. Instead of just these childlike morons that are walking around, which is what they kind of did.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yes, from the very first, I appreciated your ability.
Good, Captain Kirk. Then you will also appreciate that without the teacher, I would not have the knowledge to use that which you have thoughtfully provided.
And there in her hand is a phaser.
Okay. Where did that come from?
I don't know. Because she didn't know what the phaser was when they captured them, right?
But where was she keeping it? Like, it wasn't like she just walked in and had a phaser in her hand. Like they just went through a whole thing.
Yeah, she didn't have it.
Now, I mean, I know she's wearing a miniskirt, so I mean, like, but where did she keep the phaser? And she just like pulls it, just pulls it right out and it's set to kill.
It's weird in so many ways. We could say like maybe the phaser was stashed somewhere next to the teacher. But why did she know to separate the phasers from the communicators when they first captured them before they used the teacher? And when she said, I must know what to do with them, and she went to the room with the teacher, she's been gone a long time. She must have put on the teacher because that's how she was going to find out what to do with them. But she was pretty dumb when they walked in, even though she says this teacher lasts for 3 hours. All of it doesn't make sense.
No, this doesn't make sense. And it's an extremely contrived moment to bring the third act to a close.
Well, and it doesn't go anywhere because we start off in Act 4 and we're right back in the same spot. And then Scotty does a little fake feint and then we get the phaser back. So it meant nothing.
The fake feint was another extremely contrived, like it was lazy. I get that, it was sort of played for laughs, the way that Kirk like gives him like a nod of approval after it's pulled off successfully. But it just seems like really lazy writing. Like, how do we get the phaser out of this woman's hand? Oh, let's have Scotty fake being sick. I mean, come on. It's really weak.
And they're still trying to force her to do it. She's saying no. They ask, how long will the knowledge last?
3 of your hours.
That would be just enough time.
Like, how the fuck do you know how long time would take?
Yeah. How do you know that?
And she refuses again. And again, we're in these conversations where it's the same conversation. I want you to do a thing, you say no. I want you to do a thing, you say no. I want you to do a thing. It's not good writing.
Jim, it worked for her. It might work for me.
And Spock argues that it could mess up your brain because she's an alien.
I'm a surgeon already. If I could learn these techniques, I might be able to retain them.
Captain, you might lose the doctor that way.
He might, but we're sure to lose you if I don't try.
I think this part of the scene is really good.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I'm totally in. This is a fully Star Trek thing. Should McCoy risk his life in order to save Spock? This is all what Star Trek's about. I'm totally good with this stuff.
I'm with it too. Right. This is definitely a bright spot at this point in the screenplay.
And this idea that maybe I could preserve some of the information and bring it back with me, which is also where I go. If Spock has access to this information, then he could be communicating some of it. You know what I mean?
Well, he will be.
Well, sure, but he could be communicating it now,
I see.
without McCoy having to put the teacher on.
Well, maybe the teacher will allow McCoy to work faster at it.
Sure, absolutely possible.
Go ahead, Doctor. Put the teacher on.
She tries to resist. Scotty pulls her away. McCoy's under the helmet. Kirk lowers it down. The computer winds up. And I think Shatner's performance, worrying about his friend in this moment, is really good. I think McCoy's performance in it starting off pretty good and then starting to hurt him and then starting to overwhelm him and then going down on one knee. I think all of this is good.
And then he picks himself up and he says, of course, a child could do it. A child could do it. He does it twice. Yeah, I agree. This is a great moment.
And this sci-fi idea of you put a thing on and you suddenly know something, as a kid, I was fascinated by. I think this is a really interesting thing to gain knowledge this way. And you know what movie I bet maybe they thought about this and maybe they didn't?
That would be a movie that Star Trek was very, very much inspired by, and that is Forbidden Planet.
Oh, no, I'm going the other direction. But yes, you're absolutely right. No, I'm saying a movie inspired by Spock's brain.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. Before you tell me your answer, I gave you mine. And I feel like the alien technology that was left behind by the alien race in Forbidden Planet, which led to the downfall of all that. I think that was an inspiration for Spock's brain. But
absolutely.
Okay, so what was inspired by Spock's brain? Let me think about that. Give me the decade.
Well, there's this device that I'm going to attach to my head, and I'm suddenly going to have a bunch of knowledge I didn't have before in the 90s.
In the 90s.
Maybe I might learn Kung Fu.
Oh, Matrix?
The Matrix.
Yes, you're right. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to jack into a thing and suddenly get a whole bunch of knowledge I didn't have before.
Oh, so we just basically connected Forbidden Planet
to the Matrix.
Spock's brain to the Matrix.
and I'm sure that the Wachowskis would not acknowledge, we were really inspired to do what we did because there's Necromancer and there's all these other, things. But I'm telling you, as a kid, this element, the teacher and a child could do it. I found this to be a fascinating thing.
I agree with you.
Cut to McCoy's doing surgery. It's the lighting and is interesting that his face is all lit up. The distance between where McCoy is standing on high up on this platform and where Spock's brain is actually weird, but maybe he's using machines to do the surgery, which would make a lot of sense. So Scotty is watching in awe.
Never seen anything like it. He's operating at warp speed.
And while this is happening, Kirk is having a conversation with Kara.
We will die.
No, you'll live and develop as you should have. All this shouldn't have been done for you. Now the women here below and the men here above will control together.
And Kirk is basically saying, you'll figure it out. So what does this conversation sound like to you?
It's the end of the apple.
It's the end of the apple. So that begs the question, Steve Morris. Is Kirk here, is he violating the Prime Directive?
Yeah,
well,
totally.
If the iMorg stole Spock's brain for their purpose, and Kirk is coming to the rescue of his friend and his colleague, is he really violating the Prime Directive? Can't the iMorg get someone else to do their controller dirty work?
Well, this where it's just the Prime Directive is dumb. You know what I mean? That's really where we've gotten to, I think, in the course. It's such a rigid, it's such a rigid law. It's like, if I can't interfere in any way whatsoever, then what his actions are doing is causing the whole civilization to fall, 2 civilizations to fall.
Right.
Because the implication is there is no other brain than Spock's brain. But that doesn't mean I'm saying he's doing the wrong thing. They don't get to steal Spock's brain.
Right. That's what I mean. They don't get, who are you to steal Spock's brain?
So this is why I think the Prime Directive is, we need a more nuanced law of we are, you and I have the right to self-defense. I think self-defense is a relatively reasonable right. And so if your civilization involves kidnapping my son and raising him as your own, and that is your civilization, well, no, you don't get to do that. I'm taking my son back. Your civilization is going to fall.
There you go. Well, that's what's happening here. That's what's happening here.
The other thing I'm thinking about, though, is so we take away the pain bracelets and the belts, and the iMorg go to live with the Morg, and the Morg are these huge, primitive, giant guys. How are they going to treat the iMorg?
They're not going to be nice.
No.
They're going to be very resentful.
I think we're going to have a lot of Federation advisors.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Keeping this place Well, and how are the morgue going to know how to deal with they're up on the planet's surface without all this technology? This is messed up. What's going to happen here?
There's going to be a lot of conflict.
Yeah. But now McCoy is starting to slow down. And I like the intercutting where we, the audience, see McCoy slowing down and Scotty sees McCoy slowing down before Kirk is aware of it.
Right.
Bones. Oh, the cannula, the nerves, there are a million of them. What am I supposed to do?
I think DeForest Kelley does a really good job in this section.
No one can restore a brain. You could. A while ago, it was child's play.
Cut to McCoy now very sweaty. And we hear,
in a desperate hope that he can draw on Spock's brain for assistance, I instructed Dr. McCoy to give priority to connecting Spock's vocal cords.
This is so dumb.
It's yeah. This is when it just goes, okay, let's just embrace the stupidity and just go for it.
So we started this conversation talking about jumping the shark. This is the moment.
This is the moment, yeah.
Spock is going to talk us through his own brain surgery.
But first, McCoy has to connect his vocal cords. Oh, boy.
And just as McCoy says he's dying and I can't stop it, we hear,
Yes. Dr. McCoy, Spock, if you will finish reconnecting my speech center, I might be able to help.
I had always interpreted this as Spock no longer had access to the controller knowledge, and this was just Spock knowledge. But it sounds like you think he still kind of is hooked up with the knowledge he's getting from being the controller to help him do this.
Well, now Spock's brain is back in Spock's body.
Right.
And McCoy is just finishing it off. So
it is just Spock brain.
It's just Spock.
That's what I think.
Spock is using his Spock knowledge to reconnect Spock's brain. And by the way, for all the criticism we've leveled on the episode using the word Spock's brain over and over again, guilty as charged.
Yeah. Well, by the way, one thing that is interesting is that, do you know that patients in brain surgery sometimes are awake and are being asked questions by their doctors while having their brains operated on?
I did not know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whoa.
They will ask them to lift up your left hand or say, and they can even do things like stimulating different things in the brain manually with patients being awake with their brains being operated on.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there are people listening that are actual brain surgeons, and maybe I'm saying some of this wrong, but my understanding is yes, some of that stuff actually does go on, which is nuts.
That's impressive.
Yeah. And we go through connecting. It's just like, okay, we got his voice working, and now it's just, okay, one finger, got it. Wrist, done. Arm, elbow, sure. I guess that's it.
Yeah.
It's later on, we're closing, and Kirk says, well,
what I know, I could have made 1,000 mistakes, sealing nerve endings, joining ganglia.
And then Spock just sits up.
He sits up and his hair is perfectly in place. You would never know that he even scratched his head, much less had brain surgery.
It is so ridiculous.
Yeah, it is.
And everything's perfect. And he just goes,
Congratulations, Doctor. And thank you.
How do you feel, Spock?
On the whole, Captain, I believe I'm quite fit.
And then Spock goes off on a monologue about this civilization.
Massive exposition dump.
Yes. Well, and what it really is just setting up a dumb joke.
A fascinating cultural development of a kind
I
which
knew it was wrong. I shouldn't have done it.
What's that?
I should have never reconnected his mouth.
That is a Coonism if there ever was one.
And then Spock just keeps talking, and we all laugh as we go into credits.
So before we go on our final thoughts about this episode, there was one scene that Gene Roddenberry wanted added to this episode that he wanted added on the third day of filming. And in that scene, which takes place at the very end of the episode after they beamed back aboard the Enterprise, Gene Roddenberry wanted a scene in the transporter room where Uhura presents Spock with a Vulcan medallion called the Idic, Infinite Diversity in Infinite Combinations. That is going to sound really familiar to everyone who has seen the next episode we are going to cover, which is There in Truth No Beauty, because that would rear its ugly head in that episode with a revolt by the leads of our series. But Gene Roddenberry, by this point, was more concerned about his mail order catalog than he was about the quality of Star Trek. So the Idic scene did not make it into Spock's brain, but we will see the Idic in the next episode.
It's such a sign of that's terrible. And what's interesting is the Idic thing it's a whole thing. Obviously, we're going to talk about, but it makes more sense in the next. It doesn't make any sense in this episode,
right?
I mean, I don't even know how you would have figured out how to include it, and particularly with an episode that is as flawed as this, to then go, oh, I know, I'm going to spend my time trying to shoehorn some little profit-making device into it. Ugh, awful.
Well, the problem, the reason why it wasn't filmed for this episode was because they were on a very, very tight schedule, as we know, and because this scene would have been shot in the transporter room. Like we haven't done any scenes in this episode that took place in the transporter room, so they would have had to light the transporter room. That all that would have taken time, and they just didn't have time to do it. But Roddenberry would get his wish with the next episode.
So my guess is you've hinted that a lot of people had a lot to say.
Oh boy, did they ever. Let's start with Spock himself, Leonard Nimoy. Leonard Nimoy said, I think it was an interesting idea. If you did an episode called Einstein's Brain, you'd know what you were dealing with, and that was the attempt to do something with a brain that was special. Starting from that premise, if I were the producer of a series like Star Trek and a writer came in and said, we have an idea to do a story about Spock's brain and somebody wants to steal it, I'd pay attention. I think, oh, interesting idea. Now, James Doohan said, Fred Freiberger had no idea what he was doing. He was just a line producer, suddenly handed creative control over a show that was nothing like nothing else on television. He was simply out of his depth, and boy, was that loudly announced to the fans with this episode. Mark Daniels, directing his 14th and final episode of Star Trek, said, Fred Freiberger and I didn't agree on what the director's role was. There are many producers who don't consider the director a partner. They consider him, shall we say, an employee. This is particularly true in episodic TV. They just want you to do the work, get the shots, and forget the rest of it. I didn't particularly care for that kind of thinking. The problem with the third year is that Gene Roddenberry didn't give the series his full attention. He was doing other things, and we needed his guidance badly. Finally, William Shatner does not mince words. He said, busty, vinyl-booted, frosted lipstick-wearing alien Amazons were suddenly snatching Spock's brain. That's when the best thing that ever happened to Star Trek happened. We got canceled for good. Wow. It is a tragedy to have, throughout the course of this podcast, Steve, seen Star Trek grow, evolve, reach the greatest of heights. And with these last two episodes, And the Children Shall Lead and Spock's Brain, we are seeing a series that is starting to die. In the next few episodes, we are going to see some key figures in Star Trek leave. We already saw Gene Kuhn and Lucas and Roddenberry and even Dorothy Fontana leave. But the worst is yet to come. And for everyone who knows and loves Star Trek like we do, what happens next, what happens moving forward, it's so painful and sad to see the series sort of walk out the door.
I'm trying to figure out how to put my thoughts in order, because what we're talking about is, it's like we're heading towards, I think tragedy is too strong a word, but it's like a slow motion disaster that's now kind of starting. And for whatever reason, and maybe you can help me explain why this quote keeps popping in my mind, but I was trying to sum up, like, well, what is it about Spock's brain how do they go wrong? What exactly is the problem? And the quote that keeps coming in my brain, and I can't figure out why, is the opening lines from Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, which is, all happy families are alike, but every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those quotes where you go like, it's not that I think it's true. It's that you sort of fascinating. And here's what I think I mean by it. I spent a lot of time, both in my education and in making films and in writing and then in doing podcasts and teaching, trying to analyze why things work. And so we could be really clear about why the Doomsday Machine is working, or really clear about what moments in Amok Time or in Metamorphosis or in Balance of Terror, whatever, like what makes it so good. Figuring out what makes something bad is actually a more complicated problem.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? I mean, it's like we could point out, like, it's clear the repetition of Spock's brain and brain is brain, what is, brain and brain, what is brain, all that stuff, they're bad. But how did you get there is actually really a harder problem to figure out.
As someone who reviews movies, I've been reviewing movies for 25 years.
Yeah.
And it has been far easier for me to write a review for a movie that I love or really like than it is for me to write a review for a movie that I don't like or hate. Like, why doesn't it work? Why doesn't Spock's brain work? Well, And the Children Shall Lead is bad, and it's uniformly bad. It's also boring. It's an episode that if they took it out of the canon, Star Trek wouldn't miss it. On the other hand, Spock's brain is famous. It's famous because it was the episode that launched the third season. Like, this is what they launched the third season with. And it's like that line from The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Print the legend. The legend has been that Spock's brain is the worst episode of Star Trek. And it's not. There are other episodes that are far worse. It's not a great episode, but it does have its merits. It's an infamous episode. It's a notorious episode. And I think the problem with Spock's brain, like just the way throughout the course of this podcast episode, Steve, the way that we tracked the trajectory of this episode as starting off is really strong in the teaser and in the first act. You know, it's still good by the end of the second act, but then it gets bad in the third act and it goes off the rails in the fourth act. Watching this episode go from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows is a fascinating thing to behold. And I think the reason why it goes off the rails is because they just didn't know what to do with it. They didn't know, they didn't have their handle on the right tone and how to pull off this episode in a successful and plausible way. And there were so many rewrites done, and they didn't really pay attention to like things like, you know, Sigma Draconis 6 or Sigma Draconis 7. At one point, Kirk is saying his captain's logs, and he takes the star date and he flips the first two numbers, and nobody noticed. And I think people just stopped caring. And in this case, no one cared enough to grab this episode, figure out why it wasn't working, and fix it.
So maybe all of you listening might have solutions of what happened in Spock's brain. And maybe you might want to visit our Facebook page, do a search for Enterprise Incidents, and give us your thoughts on Spock's brain. Or maybe you're more of a Twitter person and want to search for Enter Incidents, where you can leave your comments there. Enterprise Incidents on Instagram, so you can include photos with your comments on Spock's brain. And of course, please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube or Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts. But if you are on Apple Podcasts, please leave a review. If you're on YouTube, leave your comments. We love interacting with you there. And if you want to follow me, you can do it at SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. And I'm not going to talk about my podcast. Instead, I'm going to pitch my documentary, Great White Shark Beyond the Cage of Fear. How does that relate to Spock's brain? Well, I'll tell you. They have always believed that great white sharks have a brain the size of maybe your thumb, that they're real dumb creatures. And recently, they've discovered these other organs that go out from behind the brain triangularly, and that great white sharks might be much, much more intelligent than we ever thought. And we explore great white shark brains in Great White Shark Beyond the Cage of Fear, which is available through Amazon Prime. Scott, how would people find you?
You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at MovieMans. And just like I made this challenge during our last podcast episode on And the Children Shall Lead, I challenge our enterprisers to go to our Facebook page, Enterprise Incidents, and defend Spock's brain. If you think Spock's brain is really good or great, go to our Facebook page and let us know why you think Spock's brain is unfairly maligned, and defend it. Defend the merits of Spock's brain. And there is one more way that you can support us. And Steve, on Anchor, how do you do that?
Well, the easiest thing is just go to the show notes, and it's in every single podcast app. It's on YouTube. Just look at the notes. The top thing in those notes is a link. You click on the link. It takes you to our page on Anchor, where you can subscribe to Enterprise Incidents for as little as 99 cents a month. Just think of it as a tip jar. We really, really do appreciate it.
And definitely, like Steve said, go to Apple Podcasts and leave a review of Enterprise Incidents, because we love those. We read those, and we need those reviews to really stand out. And, definitely go to our Facebook page. We love the engagement. We love interacting and engaging with Enterprisers who have been commenting on our show, on our podcast. And let's just keep that going. In the meantime, next episode of Enterprise Incidents, we rebound in a very big way, thank goodness, with a top quality episode. And that is there in truth no beauty? Absolute standout of the third season. And after two back-to-back clunkers like And the Children Shall Lead and Spock's Brain, this is one conversation we are very, very, very much looking forward to having to reinstall our love for Star Trek and what has always made Star Trek so great. Is There in Truth No Beauty is next on Enterprise Incidents. Please join us, and until then, keep going boldly.